Brown says, get that India. Big boy.
Call an ambulance! Maybe call a police! Oh, what a shot! What a shot! Campbell Killer!
Hello and welcome back to another edition of the Tip Sheet podcast. It's news and NRL time for the Tip Sheet, and I'm your host John, also known as 4020, and only one other companion this week, poor Quint, getting those wisdom teeth pulled out and he can't talk, but joining me to break down what is shaping up to be a pretty crazy week in the NRL, and we're not even talking about all the stuff that's happening off the field too, is my good mate Sixties. Big fella, we're on top of the breaking news for once this week, instead of having to post it out and find out that something's happened that is, shaping the fate of the NRL around us and not talking about it.
Mate, it is a huge episode coming up on the Tip Sheet tonight because, yes, we've got breaking news that we're going to be discussing. Plenty happening at the Eels, plenty happening in the NRL, as maybe a number of people will know by the time we actually post this podcast. But, oh, mate, what a tough time it is at the moment to be an Eels supporter. I guess the only good news is that the Tip Sheet podcast on the Cumberland Throw has just been voted New Zealand's favourite Parramatta Eels supporter podcast recorded in Australia. So thank you to, you know who you are, all those people who voted for us in New Zealand. And I know it sounds like a very niche market, but
I love a well and truly finally qualified award, right? 60s, where it's got the niche, and we occupy that niche very well. So yes, the best Parramatta podcast listened to in New Zealand but recorded in Australia in the world.
That's it.
There we go.
That's it.
So
voted
by
New Zealand listeners.
Yes, sir.
And I mean, we can't ask for more than that. It's it's pride of place, and as I said, all those New Zealand listeners there, you know who you are. Our thanks to you, and just keep it coming. It's tough times at the moment, but stick with us, eh?
And speaking of thanks, as always, a massive thank you to our partners at Star Partners, Real Estate Auburn, Narellan and Parramatta. We always give Greg and the crew a shout out every week, and for good reason. 60s, they help us get this show up and keep the site running. Incredible sponsors for the Tip Sheet. And without further ado, big fella, let's get right into it because we've got plenty to talk about.
News team, assemble!
The bad news keeps pouring on for the Parramatta Eels, mate. If it's not issues on the field with their form, if it's not issues on the field with offside players not being caught and leading to sin bins, it's injuries. And this week the Eels lose one of their key players, their captain, their fullback, and we knew it was coming, didn't we? Gutherson sidelined for an expected 5 weeks. It's a non-disclosed knee injury, and it's essentially maintenance on that tricky knee or that dicky knee. But one bye this week obviously mitigates the loss to some extent, but a further month without the talismanic fullback 60s, suffice to say, it's going to be a pretty big loss for a team that's struggling on the form column already.
It's not going to be any problem, is it? I mean, the next couple of weeks, it's only the
check schedule. Yeah, it's easy. Yeah,
look, I was hoping we'd give Gutho a rest to take it easy on the Storm and the Broncos. Give them some sort of a chance to beat us. But in all seriousness, at the start of the season, if you said, who are the two players that we can least afford to be without? And you'd have to imagine that every single Eels supporter would say Moses and Gutherson. And when we had a look at the depth chart last year and looked at the Eels roster broken down by position, this is in that series of autopsy articles for season 2023, broken down by position, and then every player, their age and the years of contract that they had. the greatest problems were outside backs and spine. And, like what are we facing at the moment is that two members of that spine, probably the players that are most integral to the team, are going to be out. Now, how much of an overlap there's going to be in those weeks, because I guess we can segue into Moses' return, because that's looking like magic round.
That was the buzz today, yeah.
So it might only be that there is a 1 round overlap where they are both out. I guess there's a chance that it could be 2 weeks if Moses isn't quite ready, and I don't think they can afford to take the risk of Moses being out. But, I mean, we're talking about things are probably likely to get worse before there's any chance of them getting better, and that's just a straight-out reflection of what's happening with the roster at the moment. And, I mean, is there anything more that we can say about that? Because, as you indicated, we're expecting that something was going to happen with Gutherson sooner rather than later, because having the knee drained on a weekly basis and basically having to take it easy with the knee through the week and then hobbling through games. I mean, what was that sight like up in Darwin when he takes that kick for goal and then he's banging at the knee, trying to get it, some sort of feeling or get it to feel right after just taking a kick? I mean, it basically looked like that scene from the Penrith game at the end of last season, didn't it? Where he just couldn't move and he was bashing at his leg, trying to get it to move, trying to get it to function properly. So I don't know. Is there anything more we can say about it? I mean,
well, naturally, the follow-up question is, and obviously it's nothing pertaining to Gutho's toughness, but who takes over? You got a month, maybe longer. You never know if these recovery timelines. Do you look to Blaize Talagi? Do you go elsewhere, 60s? Who gets the number one? Who takes over the custodial role for the blue and gold?
Well, I guess it comes down to, look, I think in a way, there's, like, first up, I think we're going to see Blaize Talagi selected there, because Moses is going to be out the first match that Gutho isn't playing. And I imagine we would be seeing the same halves pairing of Sanders and Brown for this next match. Now, depending what happens then, and Moses comes back, there may be an interesting call that has to be made. If there's any concerns about Blaize taking on the custodian role for an extended period of time, I think the other option might even be if Sanders and Brown play anything like they did against Manly, because they did go quite well. That wasn't an issue for the team, the functioning of the halves. Whether you would even possibly see Mitch Moses playing fullback. I guess what the counter to that is, it would be requiring a lot of metres run at fullback for a player returning from the foot injury.
Dylan was the emergency fullback in that Penrith game too, so there's options, I suppose, in that regard. They're not conventional, they're unorthodox, but I do think Talagi is probably the first look, assuming that they've got the confidence in him to handle the the barrage is going to come, team's going to come after him, but could be the making of the young man.
Yeah, and I think that's probably the way that it's going to go, because you just don't. I mean, BA's history is he doesn't like to mess with players playing out of position or making too many changes to regular playing positions just to solve one problem. And if he's got a fullback out, I guess he'd be looking at who can play fullback rather than who can he shift from here to there, etc. So let's move on to our final thoughts about Friday's match. Mate, anything you want to add to the post-mortems?
No, obviously, I wouldn't say stewing is the right word, but I've certainly reflected on that game on how we talked about the instant reaction. And I tend to think that we're on the money. I feel like it was individuals more so than team strategy or macro approach that let the Eels down, both coaching and playing wise. I thought we had a very good game plan to attack Manly on both sides of the ball. We went out there and executed for about half the game. Second half, our individual attention to detail certainly unravelled and opened the door for Manly to make that comeback and unfortunately get the win. Again, we're all validating our criticism of the officials, although at the time we didn't realise it with Tom Teboyevich being offside and the play that led to Will Penasini getting sin-binned. That's a pretty huge miss in the context of the game. NRL ought to be ashamed for that. That shouldn't be missed. Obviously played. I know that we were the team that scored in that period that followed, but it obviously played a pivotal role in the fatigue and workload, inequity that came between the two teams as a result. That does not mean that Mike Sivo wouldn't have had a brain snap. So, that's certainly something that still would have troubled the Parramatta Eels. It's just certainly was one that got away 60s. I think that we saw a young rookie have a fantastic debut. Yes, Samoa Oluwatu, got to him at the end, but I thought that Sanders had a great debut. I thought Dylan Brown was outstanding. I thought a number of guys. I mean, we've called his name a few times in this miserable stretch of the Parramatta Eels, but Bailey Simonson has been wholehearted, I thought. He is really one of the Eels that you cannot question in terms of effort, and he's been fantastic. I think some of our forwards, I don't know if you can call it a rock at 60s because I don't think they're fully healthy or locked in because of other stuff, but where the guys that we're paying big money for in the pack aren't necessarily standing up, and that's been part of the problem too. It's once again not the whole issue or even the biggest part of the issue, but it's certainly part of it. And then there are the guys that we singled out: Mike Acevo, Sean Lane, Brendan Hans for that one missed tackle. It's unfortunate how it works, but he had the one bad miss, and that proved to be hugely costly. Those moments cost the Eels massively, and just need everyone to lock in next week against the week after next, against the nothing worried team. They're not that good. The Brisbane Broncos, who thinks that they can beat us.
Yeah, we're going to discuss the article by the Rugby League Eye Test that is gaining a lot of traction amongst Eels followers. It's certainly widely read. I'm sure it's being read in depth by the club. It's probably something that's been picked up by journos as well. It's and the thing is about the Rugby League Eye Test is that we're talking about a website that is not dedicated to a single rugby league team in the NRL. It is a analytical. Yeah, it goes over key metrics. It examines them in a way that no other rugby league website does. The site takes a dive into all of the clubs, looking at reasons for successes or failures. And if anyone hasn't read the article, there's a link to it on all of our socials. I've got a link to it in the latest Bumpers Up column. It is absolutely essential reading because it highlights some things that we've been banging on about, but it does it in a way that we haven't examined, nor would we be able to examine in a way like the Rugby League Eye Test does. In breaking it down like that, it shows how the key metrics that are measuring the performances of teams where the Eels sit essentially right at the bottom and of the NRL, and it's really a reflection on the roster that we have and the performance certainly of the forwards in the Eels team. And the eye test is pointing to that structure of the roster, the age of the players, because they have a lot of analytics about the age when players start to dip below their peak performance. And because we have so many in the pack, I mean, we've fallen into it as well, John, because we've talked about the strength of the Eels being their pack and raved at the start of the season about the Eels bench might just be one of the best in the NRL, but we were going off names. We weren't going off current performance when it all boiled down to it. And what's really tough for us to swallow is that the Eels aren't capable. This roster is no longer capable of playing the win the collision type of football. On paper, that should be how they're able to do it. And when I say on paper they should be able to do it, let me reiterate, they have to be able to do it because they don't have the depth or the pace in the backs to play the type of game that, say, the Brisbane Broncos plays. All right? And the Brisbane Broncos play a different type of football to the Penrith Panthers because the Broncos are a team that is way faster than the Panthers. And there's other teams in the NRL that have elite pace in their team. The Eels don't have elite pace in their team. So even if you looked at the Eels squad, and let's say that all of the Eels squad were in top form, especially the forwards, you'd look at it and you'd go, well, this team is gonna have to play a forward dominant game plan because that's where their key players are found. And the trouble is, of course, that the game seems to be evolving towards the faster players. And then to make matters worse, our forwards this year look like they are really feeling the effects of age. We're talking about a group of players that are around the 30 mark. And as I said, there were articles about it last year, and not just the age of the players, but the length of the contract that they are on. And you look at it and you go, well, this is a problem. Like this is a real problem because you've got players who are contracted for an extended period of time on big money who are aging forwards, and even the addition of some faster backs. And let's say we were able to, like a miracle happened, and we didn't just recruit Lomax, we recruited a couple of other fast backs. It's not going to solve the problem of an aging pack. And yes, we've got some talented young players coming through, but you're looking at 2025, probably even more so 2026, before they're ready to become NRL regulars. Probably 2026 at the earliest. Some might get their debuts late next year. I'm talking about the middle forwards. And there might be an edge forward that might get a debut later this year, but that's debatable too, whether he's going to play edge or middle or lock. And I'm talking, of course, about Charlie Geimer. But John, you would have had a look at that Rugby League Eye Test article as well. It's damning stuff, isn't it?
Oh, yeah. And like you're talking to me about, it's sort of built along similar foundations to what you were talking about last year when you were doing an assessment of the roster. And it's the difficult thing when it comes to roster building is that you need to keep your stars, but you're almost constantly in a state of rebuilding in professional sports, aren't you? Where you have the core of your team, and that's obviously for us, Quinn Gutherson, Mitchell Moses, the way we structure our team, Reg and Junior, alongside a couple of other senior forwards. But you constantly need the injection of youth, of speed, of energy, new faces, different outlooks, different point of views. And that's probably something the Eels haven't done a good job of, is that we've obviously retained the core of our players. We have lost some key players going here and there. Isaiah Papali'i, obviously the most prominent one recently, but he's not alone there. Murata Niokore went to New Zealand. And yeah, it's hard to keep them all, but yeah, that's probably where the Eels let themselves down, is not keeping up with the external recruitment, just to keep augmenting the squad and keep keep just ticking over. And I don't know if that's part of the reason why there's a degree of stagnancy, among other things. I don't think it's the only reason. But yeah, looking at that eye test article where the Eels being essentially net 1 metre outgained in a run-to-run basis. That sort of speaks to the issues in the roster, whether it's from the outside backs, where we haven't got the speed and power to lay that foundation that we always talk about coming out of your own half, that you see the best teams do in the Penrith Panthers, in the Brisbane Broncos, the Cronulla Sharks, New Zealand Warriors. They've all got backlines that can do that, or just the forward pack itself, where the Eels have great names. And I still think there's petrol in the tank for some of these guys. We saw Junior start this season really, really well off the interchange, but they're not at the peak of their powers anymore. So it's a complicated problem that's got lots of little moving parts that are all sort of either stalling or not quite, getting the oil or grease that they need right now. And it's all come together to make a real big shit show, hasn't it?
Yeah, and you mentioned there about there's still some petrol in the tank for players, and I would suggest that there very much is, because if you're talking about the players who are would be the starting forwards for the Eels, you're talking about, and I'm going to include Junior as a starting forward here. I know he's more effective coming off the bench, but let's, for argument's sake, put him in the starting forward. So you're talking about starting props of Reg and Junior. You'd be talking about starting back rowers of Sean Lane and Bryce Cartwright, and you'd be talking about a starting lock of Hopgood, and then to have players like Madison and Offengowie coming off the bench. And so I'm talking about the older senior players here now in naming these players. I mean, you look at that and you go, okay, yes, that's some decent forwards, right? The trouble is that as they're getting a little bit older, what's happening is that they're not producing together on a weekly basis. And that's really where I think the issues are starting to come in. If you're not producing together on a weekly basis, then and they've got juice in them, but you need that youth in amongst them, don't you? And you certainly can't afford to have a group of players who are going to be eating. A number of them would probably be sitting in that 450 to 800,000 salary mark, right? That's a lot of money invested in senior forwards. And I guess the tough conversations are going to have to be held with some of them about, look, I mean, first of all, they have to decide who they would have to let go, because they're going to need to bring in younger forwards, and whether they feel that they've got those younger forwards at the club or whether they feel they've got to go out there and recruit someone in those positions. But, we've talked about some of the players that are out of form, and you mentioned, there's probably reasons for them being out of form, besides age. You don't know what's going on in players' personal lives. But the only thing we know is that BA's called a number of the players part-time footballers, which is basically saying he's not getting the performance from them on a week-to-week basis. And for me, I reckon that starts to link in with the aging group that they are. It gets harder and harder to perform on a weekly basis. Maybe it would be easier for them to perform on a weekly basis if they were playing alongside some younger players, and then their minutes could be managed a little bit differently. But we don't have those options, do we? So, yeah, anyway, all we can say is if you haven't read that article already, definitely get out there and read it.
Yeah, it's definitely get a cup of coffee and sit down and sort of sift through it. It's going to take a little bit of time, but it's a fantastic analytically driven article. And like we said, it certainly points to some of the same issues that you highlighted around 12 months ago, 60s. So we keep moving, and we move to a smaller, brighter spot on the podcast, and certainly not all sunshine and roses and rainbows in the lower grades, but they both chalked up wins on the weekend. 60s, the Jersey Flag getting their first of the season with a 26-16 win over Manly. They were up 26-0, I believe, so they got run down a little bit at the end there, but thankfully banked enough points to win with Muhammad Al-Madeen, Joshua Lynn, Arpa Tweedle, Antioch Fatala-Mariner, and Don Destritus all scoring. Arpa kicking 3 from 5. And then in the Cup, Eels 36-22 winners over the Blacktown Worker Sea Eagles. Bit of revenge from them in round 3, where they lost 40-20, I believe. And in this one, Jake Tungwall scoring in the first minute, followed by Isaac Lumi, who ended up getting a double. Kelma Torlangi, Dejan Arce, Zach Sini, and Sean Russell. Arce and Russell splitting the goal-kicking duties, going 4 from 7 combined with 2 conversions apiece. So a much better showing in the lower grades for the Parramatta Eels. It's good to see some results on the board because the Eels need some form in the lower grades if they're going to actually start building a compelling case to making changes or having guys put their hands up to make the changes to facilitate improvement in the NRL.
Yeah, I got out there to Blacktown for the New South Wales Cup game, and what was interesting was hearing the ground announcer managing Lumi's.
Lumi.
No, I think he was pronouncing as Lumeli. Lumeli, something like that. Look, it was a very good game from the Eels. I rattled off a list of players that I thought were in contention for best on field, the likes of Sean Russell, who was almost a revelation playing in the centres. It was just far and away one of the best performances that I've actually seen from him in senior football. Dejan Arce played very well. And then there were a couple of the players that came back from the NRL game on Friday and were given more minutes to play. Kelma started the game from memory and was just he had some big moments in the game. Scored a try. There was a charge down where he regathered the ball and went for about 50 metres on a run there, just got brought down inside the quarter. I think from memory we might have scored either straight after his tackle, or it might have been in later in the set. But anyway, it was a big play at that moment. So he did well. Makahesi Makatoa, he came back and did some minutes. He came off the bench. Also was very, very, very good, especially in defence in the Eels quarter. I think the score ended up flattering the Blacktown Sea Eagles a little bit. A couple of late tries from them in the game. Shout out as well to the Blacktown workers for the Anzac ceremony that they were able to provide for the patrons there. Really touching the current and past service personnel, the speech that was made. They had a service vehicle there that was that carried some wreaths to in remembrance of some recently fallen soldiers, I think from over in Afghanistan. It was very, very touching. The flag match, I didn't get out to Brookvale on Saturday, but I have watched footage of the entire game. The Eels were as dominant as it sounded when they were up 26-0. Both sides of the footy, the defence, attack, it's probably the most complete performance that they've had. You mentioned that there were some late tries scored by Manly. A couple of those were from kicks. There was one where there was a chip kick and the ball just bounced perfectly for the Manly chasers. There was another one where I think they kicked from a scrum and managed to win the race for the ball. So they chanced their hand later in the game, and that was really what their tries were about. It was a convincing performance. They're off to play in Fiji this week, the flag team. They're playing the Silk Tails. I'm expecting that they'll get another win and I guess we're probably not going to be doing a preview podcast this week, given the fact that there's only the flag that are playing. So I'm going to give my tip that the Eels will go to Fiji and they'll win by about 30 points this week.
Yeah,
So
I'll take any sort of
there's-
win, honestly. I'm not going to be greedy.
yeah. Okay, mate. So, I think that pretty much sums up the lower grades. It's a shame that the NRL team weren't able to get the job done, because it would have been the first time this year that the Eels had won all three grades. So, opportunity probably missed there, but we now are able to move on from last weekend and look at some other news happening.
Yeah, more NRLW retentions in action for the Parramatta Eels as they continue to lock up the core players or at least the form players from what they've revealed in the last 18 months or thereabouts. Most recently now, Abbi Church, who extends to the end of 2026, which brings her in line with pretty much all the other major retentions, I believe. Boss Kapua, Cassie Toi Hiku, I believe. No, Tyler Amiatu's only the end of 25, but yeah, it keeps her in line with most of them there. So another good retention there for the Parramatta Eels. Abbi obviously played fullback most recently, but can play centre and wing as well. Is a real goer. And yeah, it was certainly one of the bright spots for the NRLW last year, 60s.
Yeah, she was. And I don't know if we yet worked out what her best position would be. Will it be fullback, do you think?
I suppose it depends on Toi Hiku. Because you could argue that both their best positions might be the same position. And then it becomes a case of who gets the priority and who can play better elsewhere, I suppose.
Is there a likelihood, I think we might have talked about this with Steve Georgalis, about Toi Hiku moving in closer to the action, maybe even getting into the halves?
Yeah, so I think 5'8" was his suggestion or implication there. I wouldn't mind Toi Hiku at fullback, but you can play him in similar alignments or roles, whether it's the 1 or 6, I suppose. So if that's the case, then you could see Toi Hiku with the 6 and Church with the 1 on the backs, and then there's your spine, or most of your spine sorted there, because Rachel Pearson obviously has a 7, and then you're going to have the young Sherrington of the Reuben variety there, Reuben Sherrington in the number 9, presumably.
And look, I think, just to echo your sentiments with Abbi Church, she has probably been the most consistent performer for the Eels since the team debuted.
Yeah, I mean, she's been really, really solid. So it's a good retention. Keen to see where she plays, regardless of where she plays, but see her turning out for the Eels for the next few years. And yeah, she's going to be a core part of the team. So good signing. Well done, Steve and the crew. And yeah, we look forward to touching base with Georgalis in the coming weeks as the NRLW preseason starts to get into gear, and then we have a better picture of what the squad's going to look like heading into the season this year.
Absolutely, yep.
And I think 60s, barring anything else outrageous happening in the meantime, I'm pretty certain that's an end to the Parramatta portion of the NRL News podcast. I suppose it's part of the NRL, but also part of the fallout from the Manly game. But maybe we'll get your outrage gears fired up here. But Daly Cherry Evans has been cleared. Or not cleared, but downgraded to a grade 1 offence. It's a fine. He won't get his first suspension in his long and illustrious career, 60s.
And you know what? We were gonna talk about this in the NRL news, but let's talk about it now. You know what? This is going to sound strange to people. I don't have a problem with it.
You like it? I don't know. I felt like most of the driving force was him, though.
Yeah, no, look, don't get me wrong. Yes, I agree, and I thought he was lucky to escape not being put to the sin bin as well, because his lifting action really almost initiated the position that Sean Lane was put into, and Olakau'atu came down with Lane the rest of the way and added that force to it, and that was as much about that he was always going to be driving in the tackle as much as anything else, and yes, and Cherry Evans was guilty of a lift and a flip in that regard. But where I say that I don't have a problem with it is that he got a downgrade, and the other side of it is I can't ignore the fact that he is pretty much a clean skin when it comes to suspensions. And I guess maybe this is just me in my old age, having a bit of consideration for someone who is a pensioner on the football field. But to get to, he's 35 this year, so to have escaped suspension and to be, as I said, pretty much a clean skin up till now, so I guess it's got to count for something somewhere. People might be disagreeing with me, but maybe this is just me being prepared to take the blue and gold glasses off with a comment. But anyway, that's how I feel about it.
I don't know. I feel like both parties warranted suspension. I think it was just a really dangerous tackle. I know that good behaviour and whatnot counts to some degree, or used to at least the NRL. But that was a pretty ugly tackle. And so I don't know.
Oh, it was John, it was one of the worst that I've seen, and it should have been. Someone should have been sent off for it, not sin bin. Someone should have been sent from it, because I'm struggling to think of a worse lifting tackle in recent years in the NRL. And if they were serious about that type of tackle and injuries to the head and neck and protecting players, then once that tackle was looked at, I hate to say it, but I think if a Parramatta player did it, he would have been sent from the field, not actually sent to the sin bin. I mean, mind you, while we're at it, I'm stunned that Mike Acevo only got a fine, and maybe in retrospect, the fact that there wasn't a huge amount of force in what he did, he might have escaped with that. But he's got such a shocking record, and I just thought for certain he's out for a week or two. But what would we know?
Yeah, well, apparently not much, because I thought he was gone for at least 2 weeks, easy.
Yeah.
But yeah, like it always reminds me of that South Park episode where they cut the head off the chicken and let it go around on the, well, not roulette board, but the patented floor tiles to give the whatever the payout is for the insurance company, or whatever it is. That's the MRC. They just, you don't know what it's going to be. Charge to charge, week to week, game to game.
Yeah, yeah.
All right, so that brings us to the end of the Parramatta section of the podcast. We go to our intermission music now, 60s, and I suppose I sort of pointed towards more sad music coming if the Eels kept losing, and I didn't go for my original pick just because I struggled to find a way to sample it to put it into the gap, so we've gone for a different one this week, and it's not a cover, which was the other one. The other one was a cover. This one is actually just a reinterpretation from the original band as they play it unplugged and acoustic.
Talking away, oh, I don't know what I'm to say, I'll say it anyway. Today is another day to find you shying away. I'll be coming for your love, okay, and take on me. Take me home. I'll be gone in a day or two.
Of course, Take On Me by Aha, and if you've been watching the comic book movies recently, you probably recognise it from Deadpool. So there you go.
One of my all-time favourite Marvel. Well, it's not really the Marvel universe, is it? It's
Deadpool sort of exists in his own existence.
Yeah, I mean, it's Marvel, but it's not Marvel. It is a cracking couple of movies, the Deadpool movies. Even that special, it was a Christmas special, I think, from memory, wasn't it? No, I'm thinking of Guardians of the Galaxy, the
Yes.
Christmas special.
Yeah.
There was a but there was a little Deadpool.
Ryan Reynolds loves his little vignettes.
Yeah, that's it. The little vignettes. So, yeah. So it was one of my favourite movies of recent years, and well, a couple of my favourite movies from recent years. But mate, just also with that song, it's probably a song that's a guilty pleasure for a number of people. I also want to give a shout out to the Hindley Street Country Club. If there's any listeners out there who aren't aware of them, they're a cover band from Adelaide that has just got so much content on YouTube with their, they concentrate on certainly a lot of the big hits from the 70s and 80s, maybe early 90s, but they do a version of this, and I'll just recommend it. So go to the Hindley Street Country Club on YouTube, and I think might just be their most recently uploaded song is Take On Me. So check it out.
Very nice. All right, 60s, time to go around the NRL for the action from the weekend, which was, of course, round 8. And we got some fascinating results here. Big wins, upsets, lots of fascinating, actually, looking at this stuff now. We got a shutout, we got some close games. We got the Gold Coast Titans getting off the duck egg. So we'll start there. 27-24 for the Gold Coast Titans over in Go Media Stadium, Auckland, over the popular Warriors, the Wars. I think the Titans were down 12-0 in the blink of an eye, then up 24-12 or 26-12, ended up winning 27-24. They're up 27-12. So they scored all the points and then nearly got run down. So well done to the Titans for getting off the duck egg. They've been battling for it for the last couple of weeks, getting closer and closer. But suffice to say, for the Warriors, that's a big upset against them.
It is. I was bemoaning the disallowed try to. I'm trying to think the centre that plays for the Warriors.
Yes, Rocco Berry.
No, that's it, Rocco Berry.
Oh, Rocco, yeah.
Yeah, I had him for scoring 2 tries and scoring 2 tries in a Warriors victory. And when that try was allowed,
yeah,
that was typical 60s jinx on a team. It's why I don't bet on the Eels. And it was a try at that time, and to me, it looked like a knockback from.
I don't know.
Winger.
I don't know what a knock on is anymore. It used to be the most common sense, straightforward call amongst all the other drama we had in the game, and suddenly in 2024. A knock on, a knock back, the line's being blurred very aggressively.
Yeah, when I was looking at the replay of that, I thought, well, there's no way this is going to be disallowed because the Titans player has knocked the ball on. It's then come off what looked to me to be the back of the hand or forearm of the Warriors player who was also leaping for the ball. The ball's gone back towards the Warriors line. That's the direction that it's travelled. Rocco Berry's fallen on the ball, and then somehow they found that the ball was knocked on in that contest by the Warriors. And, it was head-scratching, but full marks to the Titans. They've been working up for that win. And I guess the real surprise was that it occurred away from home against the Warriors. And maybe the Warriors aren't quite travelling anywhere near as well as they would like to be at this time. They seem to have had a few moments where they've been able to grab defeat from the jaws of victory. So something that they're going to have to work on themselves. So, interesting. One of the more interesting results of the weekend.
And that brings us to the rest of Anzac Day, and these ones were not close. Roosters blow out the Dragons 60-18 on the back of Sam Walker's best game in his young NRL career, while the Storm, a counter for the Rabbitohs 54-20. A couple of teams rubbed out of premiership contention there. If you believe in the old hoodoo that 50 points in the regular season means that you can no longer win the premiership. For the Dragons 60s, they actually started this one pretty brightly. Zach Lomax heavily involved in all the good stuff they were doing as well, but then they just got absolutely outgunned from there. And then in the other game, I got to admit, I actually switched this one off. I didn't go through and watch this. But the Storm way too good for the Rabbitohs in this one.
Yeah, I think the issue for the Rabbitohs is something that we're about to talk about in the next section of the news podcast, the NRL news podcast. So we won't. We'll save we'll keep the powder dry there and get to that in a moment. When it comes to the Roosters and the Dragons, you know what? I think the Dragons are probably going to have these fluctuating results this year because it's re-establishing themselves under a new coach this year. You're going to have those games where they manage to find something. Maybe they adhere to the game plan as it should be, and then they have those weeks where it just doesn't happen for them, and they're going to escape a criticism from a match like that because of the fact that they are trying to claw their way off the bottom of the table.
And to Fagan's credit, he's got them overachieving right now, barring this result.
Yeah. So, not maybe the depths to which they sunk in that game wasn't expected, but as I said, I'm expecting that they're going to have highly fluctuating results this year. So, but probably a team on the improve.
Mm-hmm. A pair of games on Saturday. Saw the Broncos way too good for the West Tigers, 34-10. Although bizarre scenes at the end of this 160s, the core players for the Broncos falling apart due to cramps. Adam Reynolds taking an outrageous intercept while he could barely walk. And I'm not sure what was going on with Reece Walsh, but he was intermittent between puking and looking like he'd torn his Achilles or something like that, but it was just a really bad cramp. But Tigers nowhere near the same postcode as that Broncos team. They are very, very talented. And then out at Queensland Country Bank Stadium up in Townsville, the Panthers hard-fought win over the Cowboys 26-20. I do not know what to make of the Cowboys 60s. One week they're looking like one of the form teams of the comp. Next week they're getting pantsed. And this wasn't a case of getting pantsed. They're actually pretty plucky against the Panthers. But Penrith, even without Nathan... Wait, Nathan Cleary was back for this one, wasn't he? This was his, getting Nathan Cleary back, they're too good. But they did bring Paul Admodi onto the wing this week. So there you go. And who they're missing a prop there? Oh, Moses Leota. No Leota that week. So they were missing a few players. But too good there. And then another pair of games on Sunday. Knights, well, I suppose the Kalen Pongless Knights beating up on the Dolphins. They're not beating up, but they've won 18-14 up at Suncorp. Probably more of an indictment on Parramatta than anything else there. And then the final result of the weekend, arguably the most damning result for any team. And a result that, again, doesn't reflect well on Parramatta. The Cronulla Sharks, who have been the beneficiaries of a soft draw, but really establishing themselves as one of the top teams this year with a 42-0 shutout of the Canberra Raiders in Canberra. They absolutely brutalised them there. This was a complete no contest. Yeah.
Just going back on a few of the things that you've just been talking about, the Cowboys, is that their third loss in succession?
That might be. If I just check the ladder, they now have 4 losses, and then check the draw, go to the Cowboys. They dropped games against us, against the Sharks, who got absolutely routed 42-6, and then obviously the 6-point loss just then. So by far their best loss, but 3 in a row, yeah. And they're one of those teams that, again, is thanking Parramatta and South Sydney for dragging a lot of the attention away from a early mid-season slump.
Well, let's put them into context as well. They lost to us. Right? Where we've pretty much bookended the win over the Cowboys with some very ordinary games, and they've just had 3 losses in a row, and they're not under the microscope. They've had 1 win more than the Eels. They are going through a tough time, and the fact remains as well, they weren't able to make finals football in 2023. So there'd be question marks being raised about their performances as well, or there probably should be. But as you say, with the likes of South and Parramatta being identified before the season started by the media as having coaches under pressure,
Mhm.
then a lot of the focus is going to go on South and Para. And, it's, I mean, certainly to an extent, the South and Para have delivered when it comes to performances that justify being in the media's eye for pressure. But Cowboys lucky to escape that. And as you said, a bit of an indictment on Parramatta that the Knights were able to get away with the Dolphins. But then again, let's also come back to what we were discussing before about Parramatta and an ageing roster. We're taking an ageing roster to the tropics. Like, I'm sorry, I have to keep saying it.
Mm-hmm.
Darwin, like, seriously, if you were taking a young team to the tropics, that's probably still not ideal. But you're talking about conditions that are not meant for football, and you're taking an aging roster there.
Yes, sir.
What do you expect? What do you expect? You know, we talk about setting a team up for success. Well, I reckon in that instance, it's setting the team up to fail, to be brutally honest. So, anyway, we move on. Look, I'm going to warn people. I'm not going to stop banging on about that because it wouldn't matter. People talk about us being BA apologists or what have you. We've had the Rugby League Eye Test came out. They're a completely independent website. They've said straight out, these aren't issues that reflect on Brad Arthur's coaching, what's been happening with the Eels this season. It comes down to the roster that's there, the age of that roster and how they're performing. And in this instance as well, with it's not going to matter who the coach is in these circumstances. If they moved Brad Arthur on this year and there was another coach that came in and they were handed the exact same roster and they had to take that exact same roster up to Darwin, you're probably going to see the same result. You're probably going to see the same result through the year, maybe worse. You're probably going to see the same result up in Darwin. The trip to Darwin has to end. That's just it. And the more that you take it up there, the more you're going to get the same result.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, I warn people, I'm still going to keep banging on about it. And I'll keep banging on about it no matter who the coach is.
And we keep moving on with that declaration of war against Darwin there from 60s. Well, not even a declaration. You declared that in the instant reaction. So this is a continuation of that declaration. We move on to what we initially had pegged as a man getting another week of reprieve, but then as we were about to start recording, the news broke that the Rabbitohs, who'd been locked in a board meeting throughout the course of this day and hadn't had a result break either way, finally got leaked. And Jason Demetriou is the first coach to be sacked in season 2024. He's been moved on effective immediately. Have not announced whether they're going to have a caretaker coach internally or externally. I know that Mal Meninga was floated as somewhat comically as an interim coach a few weeks back. But now the Rabbitohs move on from their coach. And, we have the first seismic shakes in the coaching market for all the talk about Parramatta and Brad Arthur. And like you said, Sixties with the North Queensland Cowboys and Todd Payton up there. It was the Rabbitohs that made the move. They're the prime movers in this season now.
Yeah, and I mean, my guess would be David Furner, that he's just come in as a defence coach, but he's got NRL head coaching experience. The rumours are abounding about Russell Crowe having worked on the return of Wayne Bennett for some time. And look, I don't know how as a football club you can be helping the coach or the team turn things around if you've been sounding out another coach for a number of weeks. I mean, you're really talking about dead man walking, aren't you, under those circumstances? And This is where it's so awful for any club that's going through, or the supporters of clubs, where there are lots of rumours about a coach being sacked partway through the season, or they've got till a particular round to turn things around. If they've seriously got to a particular round to turn things around, that already the club has been talking to potential replacements about it. And I don't think that's a winner for anyone, because you've got people aren't on board with where things are with what's happening right now. And it's literally like saying, well, look, we're going to throw this season away.
Yeah.
Because,
obviously, yeah.
And for any team to be set up for success, and I'm going to keep banging on it with that term as well, setting up for success, you've got to have everyone on board and supportive with what's happening to achieve success. And there were, certainly what happened last year with Sam Burgess declaring his issues within
John Morris
the South Sydney club, John Morris as well. And John Morris has moved on and he's an assistant coach at the West Tigers this year. Sam Burgess is head coach over with, I'm trying to think what Super League club it is now, but he's head coach over in Super League, doing particularly well over there. Of course, the thought was that he would come back to South Sydney at some point in the future.
Warrington Wolves,
there you go. And, so they've been going fairly well over there in the Super League. Yeah, I guess to this extent, he raised what the issues were within the club. When that was raised last year, if you'd have to assume that the South Sydney Management Board, whatever, got the facts. They would have got the facts at some point. And they either had to go all in supporting the coach and saying it doesn't matter what happens in the early part of the season or what have you, you're locked in for next season. Or they had to say, look, we think it's in the best interests of yourself and the South Sydney club that we part ways. And they start a season with a new coach. They didn't do that. It seems like what Sam Burgess had to say was on the money. And they've had, it hasn't just been this season. They capitulated from being, what were they, second on the table or something after 11 or 12 last year? First, after 11, 12 rounds last year, to barely win a game for the rest of the season, not make the finals, and then to be one win out of the first 8 rounds this year. So we are talking about a pattern that Sam Burgess indicated was coming from players being treated differently. And I guess essentially pointing to disharmony in the club as a result of that. Wrong standards being set. People having different expectations placed on them within the club. So anyway, that's where they're at now. I guess more of the media attention focuses on them right now than Parramatta, but I have the feeling that if there is a media reprieve for Parramatta, it's only going to be brief. And it'll only be for the extent of this bye.
The only one we've heard linked to them is Wayne Bennett. Is that just their guy? Like, is it Bennett or bust for the Rabbitohs?
Seems to be, but we know as well that the PNG franchise bid, I mean, it's been well documented that they've had Bennett in their sights. So I guess
they're due for, was it 2026? Is that like their bid alignment?
Well, I mean, if you've got a franchise that's due to come in, and it wouldn't matter whether it was 26 or 27. If you're signing Wayne Bennett to be the coach, do you expect that him being there for 1 year is going to get the job done. Like you've really got to look at, probably 3 years, and he's not a young man. And like before, he was set up at South with Demetriou there, being ready to take over from him. So it was literally like, I guess, an apprenticeship sort of scenario, a bit like what's happening at the Dolphins with Bennett and Wolf being ready to take over from Bennett, and what was set up initially at the Tigers with Tim Sheens in charge and Benji Marshall learning the ropes and being ready to take over. I mean, are they going to go down that path again, South, if they're taking on Wayne Bennett? Because I think if they sign Wayne Bennett, they've got to go all in. He's got to be a minimum of 2 years at an advanced age that he's at, but he has to be a minimum of 2 years to have the sort of effect that they want. And on top of that, you probably got to look at the succession plan being in there from the start.
Yeah.
Their last succession plan didn't work at all with Demetriou.
I suppose the follow-up to that then is, and this probably is a conversation that includes the Parramatta Eels, given that there's plenty of discussion about their future at the coaching position, is he the right guy? Like, Wayne is still clearly a good coach, hasn't tasted premiership success since 2010 with the Dragons, and that was a stacked roster that he inherited and got them over the bump. Went to Newcastle, got them to a prelim, but then they collapsed. Went back to Brisbane, I think, from there. Went back to Brisbane. And to in his defence there, he butted heads of a board that were very way too hands-on with the football operations. And then went back to Souths again, couldn't get them over that prelim bump. And now at the Dolphins, he's done a nice job establishing them. But is he a premiership-winning coach for an aspirational team like both the Eels and the Rabbitohs?
Well, there again is another question, because his recent history is it tough to say a history of jobs half done or almost done?
Yeah,
but fully done.
Exactly. I mean, and Souths weren't lacking in talent, although the application and discipline of some of their star players, you could argue, was an issue. But was Wayne the genesis of some of those issues? Is that, given some of the egos in that room, and that's what Demetriou inherited? I don't know. This is me, obviously, as an outsider spitballing here. And again, he is arguably the greatest coach, if not the greatest coach of all time in terms of his overall record. But just recently, if you're looking at him now to be a solution, whether you're wearing myrtle and red or blue and gold, I'm not sure if he is the right guy. So
no, and the thing is, when we recently we were having a discussion ourselves about the PNG franchise bid and the fact that they were interested in Wayne Bennett, and I argued that he wasn't going to be the man for them because of the fact that, first of all, we are talking about a fella who's going to be even older, and I'm not being ageist, I'm an old bloke myself, but a fella who's going to be even older by the time they're starting up. And let's face it as well, that if they're coming in 26, they have to get actioning next year. So he'd be taken on next year, and because he'd be part of the job of getting the roster ready and planning what's going to happen. If he's we simply have to get these dates right. If it was 27, he'd have to be taken on in 26. So he'd only be free for a year for any club that wants him, and that's just not good enough.
It's not a tenable solution, isn't it?
No, but as I said, when we were talking about him for PNG, I argued that, look, I can see the value in Wayne in setting up a club, but you're talking about what for them might be a 2 to 3 year process of getting things set up. I mean, you're starting to ask a lot of a person, especially when you're talking about a club that's going to be set up in the tropics. And again, I have to come back to it. Like, that's got to be a physical toll in itself. So, Yeah, look, I don't know. I mean, I guess to answer your question, no, I don't know whether Wayne Bennett is an answer to any of the clubs. I'm probably. I mean, he still has that ambition to coach. I mean, I would have thought that
absolutely.
he might have transitioned sideways at the Dolphins into like a head of football type role, and just being there to help steady the ship as Christian Wolf starts to find his feet as an NRL head coach. So
And
anyway,
he was he being Demetrio, going back to the original news there, was not the only Rabbitoh to be given their papers to move on elsewhere. Lachlan Ilias told this week that the club no longer have a need for him moving forwards. Now he's available to talk to other clubs. Of course, the timing for him is terrible given he's just had his leg absolutely shattered in New South Wales Cup on the back of a real nasty charge down attempt. What about Lachlan Ilias, 60s? Where does his future lie in the NRL?
look, to be honest, I'm not sure, John, because he's, to me, he's never really grabbed that first grade jumper with authority at the Rabbitohs, and maybe he's a victim of the timing in which he's come into their team and the way that they've been on the slide for the last couple of years. But yeah, I'm not sure that he's a quality NRL half. I think he's maybe someone that's can do a job when he's needed, but I don't know whether he's going to be someone that's going to lead a team around the park and lead them to a lot of success. I say that with the greatest respect. There may be clubs interested in signing him, but you know what? There's also going to be clubs that will be cautious because of the type of injury that he's just sustained as well. So he's going to be an interesting signing because the club will be taking on someone who not only wasn't wanted and had been dropped to reserve grade, but also someone who's going to be coming back from a significant injury. So, yeah, not sure what his future is.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see which club's going to take a flyer on him, or if he goes to the Super League, I suppose.
Yeah, that would be where I think he should go, because that gives him a chance to re-establish himself, probably play with a bit more confidence and a bit more freedom, and as such develop as a halfback.
It's been a successful pathway in recent years for the guys that haven't quite stuck the landing in their first stint as an NRL playmaker, and they sort of fall back to Reggie's and they go over there, re-establish themselves, and end up coming back and making a bit of a fist of it. So that might end up being a pathway for him back to NRL, or maybe someone takes the punt on him. So have to wait and see. And we close out this week's news podcast with a trip by Leichhardt or Campbelltown, or maybe somewhere else, because the West Tigers 60s, are they on the move? There's been a lot of talk this week about a deal that's been struck on the down low, and whether it's a core or whether it's CommBank. But apparently the Tigers are going to have a new home game or home venue that will see them play one game out of Leichhardt, one game out of Campbelltown, and the rest of their home games at either a core, or aka the Olympic Stadium complex, which is at Homebush, or obviously Parramatta's stomping ground at CommBank.
Well, I guess that brings an end to them having any funding for Leichhardt or Campbelltown. Yeah, it's not getting the funding for those grounds is probably the motivating factor in looking for another venue. But here's the thing, John. If they're playing out of either Accor or CommBank Stadium, where is their association with the Macarthur region? It basically doesn't exist, because you're talking about, I mean, so you could say that in some sense about the Rabbitohs playing at Accor, but they do have a centre of excellence that they train out of that's still over in the South Sydney area.
Yeah,
yeah. But look at the Tigers. if they play out of Acor, they already train in that vicinity at Concord.
Yep.
So their training base and their home ground will be at neither of their regions that they're supposed to be representing, the Balmain district or the southwestern suburbs of Sydney, the Macarthur region. They're playing one game at each of those venues. I guess it's an acknowledgement that they haven't got the funding for those grounds. Those grounds do not allow them to progress as a business. And I guess this is where it comes down to football clubs and what they are able to do on the football field versus what their priorities are as a business. You look at those two grounds, they don't have the corporate facilities to support their sponsors. They just don't. And if you're at either CommBank or Acor, then you can accommodate your corporate partners. And rugby league, unfortunately, has become a lot about that.
Mm-hmm.
But let's face it, anyone that has been, and I fully understand the passion of Tigers supporters, especially those who are Balmain supporters, and how they feel about Leichhardt Oval. But Leichhardt Oval, you cannot stage NRL games there. It is not the 1960s. The ground is rooted in the 60s and the 70s at best. If you've gone out there for any sort, where there's any sort of crowd attending, good luck trying to find parking. You have to park like quite a distance from the ground, even for junior representative finals, where they might be lucky if there's 1,500 people there. Like, you just cannot get parking anywhere near there. Don't worry about travelling by public transport. So, they needed not just a massive upgrade at Leichhardt Oval, they needed a whole lot of infrastructure to assist them to continue to play NRL games there. Campbelltown, there should have been funding provided for Campbelltown, because this was a chance for a huge proportion of the Sydney population that's located out in that region to have a top-class facility and to be able to follow a team that represents that region. As I said, if they're playing at either Acor or CommBank Stadium, they'll have no affiliation with the regions that they are supposed to represent, or it'll be minimal, I should say.
Yep.
Just one game at each venue. I can understand the frustration of supporters. It's, you got to pick one of those venues, I think.
Agreed.
You got to pick one of those venues, and for me, Campbelltown.
Well, that's the biggest
You go
point
all
of
in on
difference.
Campbelltown.
Exactly. Because the inner west has already been carved up by the Bulldogs, Parramatta to some extent, the furthest extremities obviously there, alongside a host of all the other suburban teams that don't directly have ties there, but, the Roosters, Souths, all of them, they all sort of carve it up bit by bit. Campbelltown is their point of difference. The Macarthur region, Campbelltown, all the surrounds there, that would make them, have an identity to stand upon, I think. But here we are with them choosing to go a different way. And like you said, it's also a reflection of the corporate nature of the game in that regard, and servicing your corporate partners and making sure all that stuff is okay first. So I don't know if it's putting the cart before the horse or whatnot. It's so difficult in these days. So, but as a Parramatta Eel, obviously, or fan, you don't want to see them playing out of our home ground. Just from a pure tribalistic angle, it just doesn't make sense. So, anyway, on that note, I'm sure there'll be more.
There's a couple of late things I wanted to include, mate. Not late breaking, but a couple of quick additions to our NRL news. The Tapani lawsuit.
Oh yes, that's right. The Jackson Topiner, yeah. So we got an update from that this week. I think he's suing the Bulldogs for $4 million for the damages caused to him from essentially what he's alleging is a hazing session from the coaching staff where he turned up late, but I think he was arguing it wasn't unreasonably so, and was then forced to wrestle the entirety of the extended senior squad in a series of 1v1 wrestles, the way you would do when you're doing a sort of ruck training and the ability to control the ruck there. And by the end of it, he collapsed, I think. So that's it's going to be very interesting to see how this one plays out. There's some serious implications for a lot of teams here about player ability to contest corporal punishment for a failure to meet certain standards and where the line is drawn. And to be fair, if it is true, and he has witnesses that will allege the same thing to him, if he was forced to wrestle the entire extended first grade squad, I would argue that lines were crossed, even if he was in the wrong initially.
Yeah, I'll tell you what's interesting for me, John, is first of all the reaction on social media to it, because you've got people that are saying, as you just said then, that it sounds really like a line has been crossed, and people arguing about it saying, harden up, right? This is rugby league. This is what happens. Little wonder they wanted to part company with him if he's taken this attitude and he doesn't want to turn up on time, and then he's complaining about having to do extra work that related to what he missed, and so that's the sentiment that's happening out there. I've seen over the years players asked to do extra things as a result of not meeting standards, but it's I don't know what the entirety of it is in most clubs, but the sort of thing I've seen is where if there's been players that have taken shortcuts in different runs, and that might simply be that they don't go to a particular marker that they're supposed to go to, take a shortcut. Generally, it's almost like the army where the whole squad is told, no, you have to do another set now because that set wasn't completed due to player A. Player A has made you do an extra set of runs, right? So it's nothing that's over the top. It's just something like that where everyone has to do something extra and they're told the reason that they are doing something extra. And it could even be like, they might be doing Malcolm's and, someone hasn't got to the ground as they should. So they might do an extra set of Malcolms. It's never been anything that I've seen that's ever over the top. I know that if there's players that aren't at a minimum fitness standard, they might be asked to do an extra session or come in early. I think there's been like a documented fat club that's existed for players who haven't met the pinch test or things like that, and they simply come in and do extra work in the gym or extra running. So I think a lot of clubs tend to go along those lines. I've never heard of or witnessed any sort of hazing, but when you're talking about what happened with Canterbury, that I'm gathering that was probably done in a gym session where it was a wrestling session, wasn't it? Is that what it's supposed to have been?
Yes.
Okay, so I mean that's the sort of thing that's probably behind closed doors. So it's unlikely that people would have seen anything like that from the public, that is. But
he'd be counting on support from fellow teammates, I imagine, if he's got for testimony to prove or circumstantially prove what he's alleging. So
yeah, I think I saw Cameron Serraldo saying you cannot equate a rugby league workplace to any sort of other workplace because of the fact that things like this happen when you're at training. If you don't do what you're expected to do, that you're asked to do extra to make up for it, and that in essence this was doing extra. But he's talking about if the facts are true, he's talking about something that feels like it's quite extreme. He's talking about something which he said caused an injury by being asked to do that. He's also talking about something that caused him humiliation in front of the group, and to an extent, you could sort of like if it's caused injury, you can understand him being a little bit upset about this. If it's it's brought about that humiliation, I guess what it comes down to then is not just what might have transpired in terms of having to wrestle everyone, but maybe comments that might have been made as it was happening, or how he was treated afterwards. I mean, I guess all those sort of facts are going to come out. Is he going to get anyone that will be a witness that's currently with the club? You'd have to think they would be reluctant to.
It wouldn't bode well for their future at the club, would it?
No, it wouldn't. I mean, that sort of stuff's interesting because he's probably got people there still at the club who we'd consider to be a mate. And, it then comes down, if that's the case, if he has got people there who he considers to be mates and he's asked them to be witnesses, should you be asking someone? I mean, this is just a hypothetical question because we don't know that this is the case. But if you were in that circumstance and this had happened to a mate of yours, how would you feel if you're still at the club, he's gone, and then he asks you to bear witness against the club that's your current employer, knowing that would possibly put your job or your contract on the line, or a position in first grade? I mean, there's so many layers to this that make it to me, it's a real test case, but it's also, I think there's almost like moral questions about it as well. Like, what would you do if this, sort of scenario? So anyway, we have that. And there's one other legal story floating around. It's everyone's mate, Paul Kent, getting himself into a bit of a scuffle. And not only had he been stood down from his media duties, but he's evidently in hospital as well.
Yeah, I saw the footage quickly. It's pretty sad, honestly, but he was clearly heavily intoxicated. Gets into a blue.
Allegedly, John.
Allegedly, maybe that's his normal state, in which case it's even sadder. But allegedly heavily intoxicated, gets into a blue with a guy on the street outside a pub, and then gets tossed into a tree. And I think he's broken 5 ribs and punctured a lung. So he's taken some pretty heavy damage from this. As you said, being stood down from his duties on NRL 360, I don't think he's any health to do it, even if they were fine with what happened. I don't think he could even speak, given those injuries. So obviously not a good look for him, given what preceded that too, with the issues with the former girlfriend, where it was a case of both parties being pretty toxic. The stalking on her behalf, and what allegedly looks to be a issue of abusing alcohol in his case. The guy probably needs to fix that part of his life up. It's not easy though, so you know what, I know he's not a popular figure in the game, but I hope he can. You hate seeing people in a self-destructive spiral, and that sure looks like it.
Mate, I have to tell you, I felt sorry for Paul Kent before, because he was proven not guilty in that last case, and then I saw footage on social media with strangers coming up to him and absolutely abusing him, in pubs and what have you, and just like, and him just sort of sitting there and having to cop it. And I don't know whether this has been a case of someone's had a crack at him, or whether he's known but we don't know the circumstances of it. Everything is all in the alleged category. All that we do know is that, yes, this incident took place because there is footage of it. And yes, people tried to stop him from engaging in a physical altercation with the other person. The other person has I think already been charged.
Yes, correct.
And what's interesting about that as well is that, who was the aggressor in the footage that we saw? I mean, we don't know what happened beforehand. We don't know if he's already, by the time someone's filming it, if he's already hit Paul Kent, or he's done something, absolutely diabolical that has meant that, Paul Kent is so enraged that he's come after him. But in the footage that was shown, there was clearly one aggressor. Because when Paul Kent's come at the bloke, he's basically defended himself, grabbed him and flung him into the tree. And I don't know how Paul Kent got up, because there's footage there.
Adrenaline's a hell of a drug, mate. when the blood's pumping, with 5 broken ribs and a punctured lung, and he got up. So
So what happens from here, I don't know. But if you're going to start getting into fights on the street where there are people who are trying to stop you from fighting and saying, no, it's not worth it, don't, but you're still, taking off your watch and, like you go through this decision process of getting ready for the fight, it beggars belief. It really does, because in that instance, he's made a decision. And again, as I said, he is allegedly alcohol affected. But if you're making that sort of call under the effects of alcohol, then you've got a problem, because it's going to affect his livelihood and his certainly it's already affected his reputation. He had done well to come back from the issues of last year and have that gig again. Have his employers take him back on and be on that gig. I don't know if you come back from this, not unless there's something that's transpired where they say, look, for whatever reason, he's justified in flying off the handle. I can't imagine any circumstance where they're saying he's justified in flying off the handle there. So anyway, I guess that pretty much brings us now to the end of the podcast.
Mm-hmm.
Look, we've got to send out our regards to Clint again, mate, because we're hoping he's going to be right to resume normal duties for us in the news podcast on Tuesday next week.
Hopefully
no doubt we're going to be talking a lot about some interesting Eels team selections.
Yes, no doubt. And hopefully Quint's not too much of a fool after getting all those wisdom teeth removed.
Yes, good one. We'll also be, we have to make sure as well that we thank our sponsors, the Star Partners Real Estate, Auburn, Narellan and Parramatta. Again, Greg and the team, I mean, what can you say about, first of all, just absolutely loyal Parramatta supporter, and certainly loyal to the Cumberland Throw in his support over the years. In all honesty, people, if we didn't have Star Partners Real Estate come on board when they did, we would not have been able to do what we've done with the Cumberland Throw. So, our thanks to Greg and the team. And again, say a big cheer to our New Zealand listeners who have voted the Cumberland Throws Tip Sheet podcast as their number one Parramatta Eels podcast recorded outside of New Zealand, recorded in Australia. So we fit that top of the tree in that category.
And it's too late for anyone that's curious. We've already celebrated. So when we get busted cheating the cap and they take it off us, it's still ours.
Yeah, that's it.
And on that bombshell, I think we'll wrap up 60s.
Yes. And as we're on a bye this weekend, but as always say, go you mighty Eels.